David was a shepherd boy. He lived in the land of Israel a long, long time ago. David looked after his father's sheep. He kept them safe from lions and bears. David was a good shepherd. He was also brave and strong. David loved to sing and play his harp. He made beautiful music to praise God. God was his best friend. David knew God would always look after him. One day, a giant came to Israel. His name was Goliath. He was very, very big. Goliath was a soldier from the land of Philistia. He shouted across the valley to the Israelite army. "I am the strongest," Goliath roared. "Send your best soldier to fight me. If he wins, we will be your slaves, but if I win, you will be our slaves." The Israelites were scared. They had never seen such a terrifying sight before. The fear was palpable, spreading through the camp like wildfire. Children clung to their mothers, and even the bravest men felt a shiver down their spines. Goliath was so big and strong. He towered over everyone, his shadow casting a long, dark presence over the valley. His muscles rippled under his armor, and his voice boomed like thunder, sending chills down the spines of all who heard it. King Saul was the leader of Israel. He was afraid too. Despite his position and the responsibility that came with it, he felt helpless. He sat on his throne, his face etched with worry, knowing that his people looked to him for guidance and protection. None of his soldiers wanted to fight the giant. They avoided his gaze, hoping not to be chosen. The thought of facing Goliath in battle was too much to bear. They whispered among themselves, their voices tinged with fear and uncertainty. Every day, Goliath shouted his challenge. His voice echoed through the valley, a constant reminder of the threat they faced. He mocked the Israelites, taunting them and daring anyone to come forward and fight him. And every day, the Israelite soldiers trembled with fear. They huddled together, trying to find comfort in numbers, but the fear was overwhelming. They knew that none of them stood a chance against the giant. David's 3 oldest brothers were soldiers in Saul's army. They had been there from the beginning, witnessing the terror that Goliath brought. They tried to stay brave, but the fear was always there, lurking in the back of their minds. One day, David's father said, "David, take this food to your brothers." He handed David a basket filled with bread and cheese, hoping that the sight of their younger brother would bring some comfort to his sons. And find out how they are. David's father was worried about his sons. He wanted to know if they were safe, if they were holding up under the pressure. David nodded, determined to fulfill his father's request. So David went to the valley where the army was camped. He walked through the camp, seeing the fear in the soldiers' eyes. He knew that something had to be done, but he didn't yet know what role he would play in the events to come. When David arrived at the battlefield, he was immediately struck by the tension in the air. The ground seemed to tremble with the weight of fear and uncertainty. He heard Goliath's challenge echoing across the valley, a booming voice that sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest soldiers. As David looked around, he saw the fear in his brother's eyes and the dread that filled the air. The soldiers, who were usually so brave and strong, were now huddled together, their faces pale and their hands trembling. It was a sight that David had never seen before, and it filled him with a mix of confusion and determination. "Why doesn't someone fight that giant?" David asked, his voice cutting through the silence. The soldiers turned to look at him, their expressions a mix of surprise and disbelief. How could this young boy, barely old enough to be on the battlefield, think he could stand up to Goliath? "Goliath is too strong," his brother Eliab said, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and frustration. "You are just a boy. Go back to your sheep." But David wasn't afraid. He had faced dangers before, and he knew that with courage and faith, anything was possible. David stood confidently, his eyes filled with determination. He knew that he had to do something, that he couldn't just stand by and watch as his people were terrorized by this giant. He took a deep breath and made his way to King Saul's tent. He went to King Saul and said, "I will fight Goliath." The king looked at him in disbelief. "You?" said the king, his voice filled with doubt. "You are just a boy. You are just a boy," King Saul repeated, shaking his head. But David stood his ground. He knew that he had to convince the king, that he had to make him see that he was capable of this great task. "God save me from lions and bears," David replied, his voice steady and confident. "When I was tending my father's sheep, I faced many dangers. But God was always with me, protecting me and giving me strength. He will save me from this giant too." David's words were filled with such conviction that the king couldn't help but be moved. He saw the fire in the young boy's eyes, the unwavering faith that shone through. And in that moment, he knew that David was not just a boy, but a true warrior with a brave heart. King Saul offered David his armor to wear, but the armor was too big and heavy. David took it off. He knew he didn't need armor to fight God's battles. David went to a stream and chose 5 smooth stones, carefully selecting each one. He put them in his shepherd's bag, ready for the battle. He took his sling in his hand. David wasn't afraid. He knew God would help him in this fight. David walked towards Goliath, his heart pounding but his faith unwavering. The young shepherd boy, armed with nothing but a sling and a few stones, faced the towering giant who had been terrorizing the armies of Israel. The sun beat down on the battlefield, casting long shadows as the two figures approached each other. David's steps were steady, his eyes fixed on his opponent, while the giant's laughter echoed across the valley. The giant laughed when he saw him, a deep, booming sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. Goliath, towering over David, found the sight of the small boy almost comical. His armor glinted in the sunlight, and his voice was filled with scorn and derision. "Are you the best Israel can send?" he roared, his voice dripping with contempt. "Do you think a mere boy can defeat me?" His eyes blazed with anger and amusement as he taunted David, trying to intimidate him with his sheer size and strength. "I will feed your body to the birds!" Goliath bellowed, his voice echoing across the battlefield. The threat hung in the air, a promise of violence and death. The giant's confidence was palpable, his belief in his own invincibility unshakable. But David, undeterred by the giant's threats, stood his ground. He looked up at Goliath and said, "You come against me with a sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. Today the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day, I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." David's voice was strong and unwavering, filled with the conviction of his faith. Goliath, enraged by David's words, charged towards him with a roar, his massive frame moving with surprising speed. The ground seemed to tremble under his weight as he closed the distance between them, his weapon raised high, ready to strike. But David was ready. He reached into his bag, took out a stone, and placed it in his sling. With practiced precision, he swung the sling around and around, the stone gaining momentum with each rotation. He let go of the sling, releasing the stone with a flick of his wrist. The stone flew through the air, a small but deadly missile aimed straight at the giant. The stone flew through the air, its path true and unerring. It seemed to hang in the air for a moment, a silent harbinger of what was to come. Wham! It hit Goliath right on the forehead, the impact resounding like a thunderclap. The giant's eyes widened in shock and pain as he staggered, clutching his forehead. The mighty Goliath, who had seemed invincible, began to topple, his massive frame crashing to the ground. David had triumphed not by might but by faith. The giant fell to the ground with a bang. David had done it. He had defeated the giant. The Philistines saw their hero was dead. They were terrified and ran away. The Israelite army chased after them, shouting with joy. David had saved them. David knew he couldn't have won the battle without God's help. He was a true hero, brave and faithful. And from that day on, everyone knew that with God's help, even seemingly impossible things are possible.